better prepared to save lives, better prepared to share. And that needs to be on the basis of an agreement. This can't be something that we just informally agree and then forget. This cannot be file and forget. This cannot be business as usual. This is business unusual, and the Director General feels and has led the way in working with and asking our Member States to come together and create a new framework, to create a new platform for us all to work better together, to better prepare, to better react, to better respond, to save lives, and to create stability and resilience in the systems we most rely on in a crisis. That has to be a goal. As he said, if we can make agreements on so many other things, we need to agree on this. The nature of that agreement, the depth of that agreement, and the scale of that agreement is very much down to the Member States. It is their process. The Director General is trying to drive and build a consensus for the best way forward, to convene and to convince. I think I remember a previous regional director, Dr. Al Alman, said to me once that the World Health Organization has two superpowers, the power to convene and the power to convince. And I think we need to convene, and then we need to convince ourselves and our Member States that there is a way forward, that we, as a collective group of nations, can deliver more for our citizens. And the DG has led the way on that from the very first day of this pandemic, and will continue to drive that message, that once this pandemic is done, we're not done. We need to not be done. We want to be done with the pandemic, but we cannot be done with pandemic preparedness. Chief?
You want me to add, but you have said it already nicely. Thank you, Helen. Thank you. Very nice to hear your voice, and thank you for this very important question. Of course, this session will be a launching pad, as I said in my speech, for a negotiation between member states. But I hope it will be a launching pad for a successful outcome, for a better outcome. We have all seen, going through this pandemic, what has really failed. One of the failures is many countries haven't seen the obligation they have, because there is no obligation on pandemic preparedness and response. As you remember from the start, when the pandemic hit, some countries were banning export of masks, export of raw materials, and now export of vaccines, because they don't have any obligation, and they don't have any rule or law that would prevent them from doing that. Of course, one example, as I said, is sharing of technology, but there are many other challenges because we don't have a law or rule of a game that countries were not doing, or institutions or companies were not doing something that they should have done. As you know, to govern a country, you would need law, you would need rules. rules. And that actually brings the obligation. And to govern also the world, especially during pandemics, or to really manage shared problems like pandemics, you need laws and rules. That brings obligation by countries. So that's what we miss, and I hope countries will agree for a binding pact so that pandemics and epidemics can be managed better, because it's only when there is a rule of law or pact that countries would behave in a certain way. So that's what we expect. I hope they will agree to start a process for a binding pact that will address the problems that we have faced. I think they can really come up with a solution, because everybody has seen to what extent we were really disorganized, and all have seen the failures in the global system. So we expect that, because I don't think it's a problem for anyone to see. Everybody has seen it, and I hope the outcome will be good. But still, we don't expect everything to be finished now. It's a start of a journey, and I hope, but the outcome of that journey will be defined now based on what they agree during this session. So thank you so much for that question, and I hope this generational agreement, this is going to be a generational agreement, will be realized from the process that the member states will agree at the end of this month. Thank you. Christian?
Thank you so much. Next question goes to Peter Kenny, Anadolu Press Agency. Peter, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I'd like to know about children and adolescents. WHO and the SAGE group say that they are reviewing the vaccination and timing for children and adolescents. Can you comment on this, and can you explain how children and adolescents are now affected by this disease? Because at the beginning, they were seen as a low-risk group. Are they now being seen as a normally at-risk group? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and we move to our Chief Scientist, Dr. Swaminathan.
Yes, thank you for that question, and we know that many people are interested, obviously, in this, particularly parents. So let me try to review what we know about infection in children, and also to say that the Strategic Advisory Group of experts on immunization is constantly reviewing the evidence as well, and there's likely to be a statement. In fact, there is a policy statement that has just been put out. I think the first thing is that, just looking at the epidemiology of this disease, and from all of the data that's been reported to us, if you look at people under the age of 25, less than 0.5% of global deaths have occurred in that age group. And if you look at children less than 5, it's 0.1%, and 5 to 10, it's also 0.1%. So the one thing that's clear and that's been consistent from the beginning up till now is that while children certainly get infected almost as much as commonly as adults do, the risk of severe illness and death has been consistently very, very low. And this is why, and we know that this is progressively increases with older age and the underlying comorbidities. The risk of severe disease keeps on increasing, so this has been consistent. However, there are children who get severely ill. There are children who develop post-long COVID, and there are children who develop the multi-system inflammatory syndrome as well. But again, very, very small proportions if you look at overall. We've also seen many countries which have done zero prevalence surveys have actually shown that children the level of infection is almost as high as that in adults. So meaning that children were exposed, they got infected, but remained to the large extent asymptomatic. So that's about the burden of disease. Now about vaccines, obviously all of the trials were first done in adults. They received emergency use listing and approval for adults. They were rolled out, and many of the vaccine developers are looking at extending the vaccination to children, sometimes with a lower dose of the vaccine, sometimes with the same dose. And so as and when the manufacturers submit the data to WHO and to the regulatory agencies, of course, we look at that data and we provide emergency use listing. So there are a couple of vaccines that have received, the Pfizer-BioNTech has got an EUL above 12. We're looking at Moderna, but we know that specific vaccines like Sinopharm and Sinovac, for example, in China approved from the ages of 3 upwards, I believe. And similarly, Covaxin has also been studied in India for that age group, but none of them have emergency use listing in children. So looking at the vaccination policy, that the roadmap that was developed by WHO, by SAGE, and that most countries have adopted, is starting with vaccinating priority groups. That's people at the highest risk of death, with the primary goal of reducing mortality first in the pandemic. So that's the older age groups. That's the health workers, the frontline workers. And we see now from data that, yes, 2 doses of vaccines, all of the approved vaccines, definitely saves lives. None of them are 100% effective, but majority of them are, efficacy above 90% in preventing death and severe disease. So highly effective. So that's why we need to start with those priority populations, make sure that they are fully vaccinated with 2 doses, and then the adolescents would be the next group, because there are adolescents with underlying illnesses, and we know in many countries that obesity is a risk factor for severe disease, obesity in adults, but also obesity in adolescents. There are also adolescents with other underlying illnesses that put them at high risk of getting severe illness. So again, that group should be prioritized with a vaccine that's approved for use in adolescents, and that should be the next group. Finally, I think, whether children get vaccinated or not will depend a lot on, firstly, how we're able to cover these other priority groups first, what the epidemiology of the disease is. I think we need more seroprevalence data in children to understand how much natural infection has occurred, and this will vary from country to country. And then when we get to the goals of reducing transmission, really down to very low levels, at that point one might consider, of course, vaccinating children as well. What we do know is that education is very, very important, and we have to do everything possible to keep schools open. And as we've said many times, schools should be the last to close and the first to open, and it should be a high priority for every country. We have a lot of guidance out there, WHO and UNICEF, on how to open schools safely. It does not require that children be vaccinated. Certainly adults who work in schools should have received vaccines. And I think the guidance on children will be very contextual and specific to local context. But we also need to then wait for more vaccines to have the data in children before we can make further recommendations. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swaminathan. We move over to China, and I have Dong Liu from the paper in China. Dong Liu, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. My question is, how can other countries to avoid another COVID outbreak as many of them are reopening their countries now. And especially, what do you think of the European CDC's latest suggestion that all adults should have a booster right now? Thank you very much.
Two very separate questions. Maybe we start with Dr. van Kerkhoff.
Yeah, I can start. I'll take the first part of that question about how to avoid future waves. So the way that we issue our guidance, we understand that people need to get back to their lives and people want to go back to work, and it's really critically important, just as Sumya has said about opening up schools. Our advice has been, since the beginning really, is to make sure that when you make adjustments to the measures that are put in place, that it's done very carefully, that it's done in a slow and in a staggered way, and that the approach that is used in each country is based on the context, the situation there, the epidemiology, and not just the numbers of cases and the numbers of deaths, but also looking at which proportion of your population is getting vaccinated and what impact is that having. Who are you missing in your vaccination priorities in reaching those critical populations? But when you use the public health and social measures, and again, I don't mean, we've never meant lockdown when we say public health and social measures. It's a combination of interventions with physical distancing, some movement restriction in some situations, making sure that we have disinfection, we have good ventilation, we wear masks, we avoid crowded spaces. All of those interventions provide an opportunity for a layered approach. But when you add those layers on, when you start to lift them and you take those layers off, they need to be done carefully. If you take all of those layers off at once, the virus will resurge. And that's what we are continuing to see. And in the context of the Delta variant, which is much more transmissible than the original strain, the ancestral strain, if you have that in the context of increasing of people mixing, the virus will thrive. So our advice to countries continues to be to look at your local situation and make adjustments very carefully. Communicate with your public, communicate with people to say what needs to be done where, and if changes are going to be made, make sure people understand how they can keep themselves safe. It's not just enough to put only the responsibility on individuals. We need policies that are in place that make sense, that are tailored, that are approached, and that support people in actually carrying out these life-saving measures. So whatever measures are put into place, whenever they are lifted, they need to be lifted slowly, they need to be lifted carefully, and as the pandemic evolves and as time moves, reassess. Make an assessment of where you are, and if course correction needs to be done, make that course correction. For us, that's a strength, and what we see in many countries is looking at what they're doing and making some changes based on the local situation, because it is dynamic. There's a lot that is happening right now, and we need people to be empowered, we need them to be engaged, and we need to enable them to be able to carry out those life-saving acts.
Dr. Swaminathan for the second part, please.
Yes, so to address the question of the European Centers for Disease Control recommendation on boosters, we're aware that many European countries, many countries around the world are recommending boosters for certain specific population groups, and in fact in some countries everyone over the age of 18. So the European Technical Advisory Group of Experts, the ETAJ on immunization, has also met to review the situation, taking into account the epidemiology, the rising cases in many countries in Europe, the strain that it's placing on the health system, and all of the things that were mentioned by Dr. Tedros and Dr. Ryan earlier. So the following recommendations have been made. The first and most important is we need to vaccinate those people who are not vaccinated. There are people in every country, even those who have lots of supply of vaccines, that have not been vaccinated. In fact, in many countries, it's stagnating. The vaccine coverage is stagnating at between 50 to 60% coverage. So we need to really make progress there, because that's the group that's most at risk of getting infection, spreading infection, and also falling sick and ending up in the hospital. So we shouldn't forget that there's a lot of mileage to be covered there, and especially if some of those people are in the vulnerable and high-risk groups. There are elderly people, there are disabled people, there are people in care homes, there are people who cannot access vaccines, we need to look at every possible means, engage the communities to make sure that everyone who needs a vaccine has access and gets the vaccine. And this involves a lot of communication and community engagement. The second is that there are immunocompromised people. There are people who do not make a good immune response for one reason or another. There's a whole list of conditions. Those people need a third dose, an additional dose, because the first 2 doses have not brought them to where they are. Similarly, people who receive 2 doses of either Sinovac or Sinopharm, many European countries are using these vaccines, and are over the age of 60 should receive a third dose between 1 to 6 months after the course. So those are additional or third doses for people who we know have not made a good immune response. And then finally, there are countries that are giving booster shots to either target populations. The ETAJ, the European Technical Advisory Group, has recommended that those countries that are offering boosters, again, prioritize giving it to those people whom we know are at the highest risk of getting very ill if they get infected. So it's the same groups that have been laid out already in the prioritization roadmap. And finally, SAGE is constantly reviewing the evidence on boosters. The Director General mentioned, we know with the Delta variant, for example, that the protection against infection is not as high as it was with previous variants. So it was 60, 70% against previous variants. It's 40% against infection now. But however, the threshold for prevention of severe disease is still above 80% in the majority of cases. This will, the science keeps changing, coming in. We have more data. We're tracking all the studies. And so we will make recommendations by age group, by population group, as the more data comes in. But for now, I think this is the recommendation for Europe. And again, focus on the unvaccinated and then on the really high risk and vulnerable groups.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swaminathan. We are slowly coming up to the hour, and we have an extremely long list of journalists, so maybe we can take one last one, and that's Naomi Kreske from Bloomberg. Naomi, please unmute yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my question. Looking again at Europe, I was wondering if you think it's possible for countries like Germany to break this wave of the pandemic without a broader lockdown. And returning to the UK question as well, do you think the UK has anything to teach the rest of Europe in this regard, as they've moved forward with fewer restrictions, even amid high case rates? Thanks.
I think Germany is a large country and it's a federal state, and I think the situation in different parts of Germany is different and will require different approaches. So I don't think you can make one answer. And again, that's the essence of it. And I think maybe one of the things that Germany has done well, and particularly the UK has done well, is being able to have that micro data, knowing what's happening locally, at local county level, within the nations that make up the United Kingdom, and then having that overall view of the world. And I think Germany is looking at the problem in the same way. What's driving transmission in each of the states, and then what's driving the hospitalizations and deaths. And as the DG said in his speech, in some cases, the hospitalizations and deaths are mainly been driven by the fact that vaccination rates are low, as Dr. Samia said quite rightly, specifically in those highly vulnerable people, older people or immunocompromised people. And the priority is to get those individuals vaccinated as quickly as possible. So the question you're asking, do we want to get transmission down? Yes, we do. But first and foremost, we need to get hospitalizations and deaths down. And the best way to achieve that is to ensure that each and every individual who is likely to do not well with an infection is vaccinated as soon as possible. Whether that means getting better at taking the vaccine to people or bringing people to the vaccine, whether it means informing people in a more proactive way and addressing their hesitancy. And really going out there and knowing, I mean, in many, many countries now, we're down to a smaller and smaller group of vulnerable people. Governments should know exactly who has not been vaccinated and move away from blunt percentages to missed individuals. Why did we miss this individual? Did we miss this individual because we didn't know they were there, or we didn't have the logistics, or that person couldn't reach a vaccination centre, we couldn't reach them, or that person has vaccine concerns, and one by one to protect those individuals and move away from blunt statistics and move towards vaccinating those people the system has missed and vaccinating those people who still have individual concerns. That has to be a primary objective, because that's how we will save lives. On top of that, we can reduce the pressure in the system by reducing transmission. We can reduce the chance of the emergence of variants by reducing transmission. So I think that's where Germany and other countries need to go. And again, I think the United Kingdom and Germany, but UK has really led the world in how to look at data, how to do excellent analytics, how to give context and get insights for disease control. So some great examples from the UK on how you should approach measurement around pandemics and epidemics.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but Dr. Tedros will have to leave, and we're about to close. And before we close, we'll send audio files and Dr. Tedros' remarks tomorrow and today after the briefing, and of course the
All right. My name is Tashira Garraway. I am the founder of Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence. I am also the fiance and the mother of Justin Tigan's now 14-year-old son. I stand here today in solidarity with Katie Wright, the mother of Dante Wright. We are here today as families that have lost loved ones at the hands of law enforcement here in the state of Minnesota. We have about 8 families that is standing here today in solidarity with the Wright family, demanding justice for Dante Wright, as well as all of the other families that led up to Dante Wright. We know that there have been cover-up after cover-up after cover-up here in the state of Minnesota. Justin Tigan's murder was a cover-up. All of these other murders, Jeffrey Smith, we have here today the family. We have Courtney Williams' family. We have Hardell Sherrill, and we have the significant other of George Floyd. But we know that there was many other cover-ups that led up to Dante. And had these cover-ups have not happened at the hands of the BCA and Drew Evans, we would not be here today standing here for Dante Wright. So we are asking and demanding that Kim Potter be held to the highest extent of the law, and we are also demanding that they stop all the cover-ups that are happening behind the scenes. I also want to mention today that the head of the BCA, Drew Evans, did let the chief of police know in Brooklyn Center that he did not think that it was right that he let the videos free for Dante Wright, for the public and the family to get to know the truth about what really happened to Dante Wright. So there was no reason why those videos should not be released. That is the only reason that we got the transparency that we got, because those videos were released. But we know for many other families that did not happen. So that's why we are standing here today in solidarity as families, demanding justice for Dante Wright and all stolen lives. We will now have words from the mother of Dante Wright, Katie Wright. Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Katie Wright. I am Dante Wright's mom. I want to first and foremost just thank everybody for the support on April 11th all the way up until today going forward. Everybody who's been there for us, standing with us on one of the worst days of our life, on one of the worst months going forward of our lives. So we really thank you and we appreciate this. With the upcoming trial coming tomorrow, I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of our family.
We will now call forward the attorney for the Wright family, Jeff Storms.
Thank you, Tashira. You know, we all thought it was really important to be here today because of the history in this state of not holding officers accountable. Individuals who would come to my office, folks like the folks who are standing up here today, one of the first things I would often tell them is, don't hold out hope that there's going to be a criminal prosecution, because criminal justice just wasn't something that families ever saw in this state. Just to have this trial is an extraordinary amount, or an extraordinary step towards justice that so many of these other grieving families have never experienced. You know, they didn't experience a legitimate investigation, let alone a prosecution. And I know Tashira mentioned a number of the families who are up here with us today. I have families in my own past that I've worked with, such as the family of David Smith. And David died in Minneapolis in almost an identical way to George Floyd, and his death was supposed to stop what happened to George. And, you know, there was no real investigation into the officers in that case. And I talk to that family all the time, and I think what's really hard for anyone in the public to grasp is just the deep level of grieving and trauma continues to pour upon these families when they know there wasn't at least a legitimate investigation and legitimate attempts towards justice for their loved one. So we are very appreciative, but this is only a first step, the prosecution. We now need a conviction. And Minnesota is going to be tested with respect to its values and ethics. You know, a couple of years ago, we had a black officer who killed a white woman, and he was held greatly accountable when he said he shot someone and it was an accident. Now we're going to be faced with very similar circumstances, and the question is, are we prepared to hold a white officer accountable for killing a young black man when he says, or when she says it was an accident, which obviously we dispute, and the Attorney General's office has done an excellent job of laying out why this is not some mere accident. So we're going to learn a lot about ourselves. We're going to watch jury selection and see, do the defendants do what we saw in the Ahmaud Arbery trial? Are they going to try to have the whitest jury possible? But even if that's the case, if there is a white jury, is a Minnesota white jury prepared to hold a white officer accountable and under these circumstances? It's going to tell a lot of us about where we stand as a state. But what you're staring at is a lot of really, really important history, which is why I thought it was important to be here, because the fight that these families have had to get any level of justice and accountability has helped us move the ball forward even further. We've now had the conviction of Derek Chauvin. We're going to have a prosecution in this case. And I just think everyone can't discount how important the work of all these families behind us have helped everyone get to that point. So we thank you all for being here today. And I do just want to point out, if there are questions at the end, you know, Katie is a fact witness in the trial, so she's not going to be doing any Q&A. If there are questions, I'll do my best to try to answer them at the end, but we'd ask you to respect the fact that, you know, Katie very much wants to maintain the integrity of the criminal process. Thank you.
We will now call forward some of the families that are here to stand in solidarity with Katie to demand justice for Dante Wright. I will call forward the mother of Courtney Williams, Tahisha Williams.
Hello. My son was killed by the Minneapolis Police Department 17 years ago, October 24, 2004. No justice has been anything for me, but I come here today and stand in solidarity with Katie for everything and for everything that she's going through, I have been through. So, thank you.
I will call for the mother of Hardell Cheryl, Delshia Perry.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Delshia Perry, the mother of Hardell Cheryl and the founder of Be Their Voices. And of course, I had to come and stand in solidarity with Katie and her family. And we are expecting justice. We are not asking for it. We are demanding it. As you all know, it has been over 3 years since my son was medically neglected and left to die in a jail cell. And we still are waiting for the FBI to come in and do whatever they need to do so that we can get the justice that we deserve. No amount of money will replace our children. We're not seeking money per se. It will help, of course. But what we really seek, outside of the fact that we know our children are gone and we'll never get them back, is that people be held accountable for their evil actions and the things that they think that they will continue to get away with. Enough is enough, and we demand justice in this case and all of our cases. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Delshia. We will now call forward the mother of Jefford Smith, Matilda Smith.
Thank you all for coming. I stand today in solidarity of Dante Wright and Dante Wright's family, Katie. I too am a victim of police violence. 4 St. Paul police shot my son over 52 times. We want justice for Katie. I didn't get it for Jafford, and I still seek justice for Jafford. I seek justice for Katie Wright, Marcus Golden, Jamar Clark, Justin Teagan. I seek right for Courtney Williams. I seek justice for all of us. We don't deserve this. Minnesota has treated us poorly. And Minnesota is a racist and prejudiced place. And it proves itself. It proves itself from slavery. That's right. This place needs a culture change. It needs a change. It needs changes of judges, prosecutors. We want BCA gone. BCA needs to go. They have covered up all of these murders. We're not going away, BCA. We're not going away, Minnesota. We will fight for our children until the death, because we don't deserve this. Katie is where I was. She don't deserve this. Minnesota has so much blood on the streets of from our loved ones that they've killed. The state of Minnesota should be held responsible for it all. We don't care about money. We care about our loved ones. We can never get them back. There's no amount of money you can pay for my son. There's no amount of money you can pay for Katie's son. We deserve justice, and we will fight until we get it.
Thank you, Matilda. We will now call forward the loved one of Emmett Till, Terry Watts.
Hi, I'm Terry Watts, relative of Emmett Till, 14-year-old youth that was killed, lynched in 1955. Our family is still fighting for justice. We've been fighting for 66 years. His family is always fighting. But we are here today to stand in solidarity with Katie Wright for Dante Wright to get justice. We need the justice, and we also stand in solidarity for all of the families, impacted families. We will get justice. Justice will be served. We believe it will be.
We will now call forward the significant other of George Floyd, Courtney Ross. Thank you.
I'm going to try and keep this short. I prepared something because this case is so dear to my heart. Dante Wright was a student of mine at Edison High School. He was a joy, and his smile. Would light up this room 1,000 times. I just want to share with you quickly. On April 11th, 2021, many of the families here and families that had lost loved ones to the police were gathering with my angel, Tashira, to try and celebrate the birthday of her fiance, Justin Tigan. Before we could make it out of the parking lot to go have cupcakes and celebrate him, Amity, who is Kobe Heisler's mother, who was also killed by police, stopped me and said that there had been a shooting in Brooklyn Center, that a man had been killed there. By the time I got home, I found out that that young man, was Dante Wright. Mind you, Dante's murder took place during the international trial of my man, George Floyd, who was murdered by Derek Chauvin. The fact that Kim Potter garnished a weapon for a routine traffic stop when the entire world was looking at racist cops under a microscope proved to me that Kim Potter was so brash and brazen that she murdered a black man with no thought, and she did that admittingly so. Kim Potter was seen as a senior officer, an officer that trained new cadets, a trainer who claimed not know the difference between a taser and a gun. In all my years working in education, I never mistook a sticker for a stapler. There is no excuse for her incompetence when it comes to people's lives that are at stake. Personally, it makes no sense to me, and I believe it is a lie. I believe Kim Potter has profiled black people in Brooklyn Center for a long time and finally lost her temper and murdered Dante Wright. We are not in Kenosha, Wisconsin, people. We are in Minnesota, and we will not continue to let these racist cops walk the street. We will send them to prison as we did Derek Chauvin. Dante, rest in peace. We will fight for you. And I love you, Katie. This is pain like no other, everyone.
We will have Delshia Perry mention at the end the families that have lost their lives in the jails here in Minnesota. My name again is Tashira Garraway, and Justin Tigan was brutally beat to death by the St. Paul police August 19, 2009, and thrown inside of a trash dumpster by the St. Paul police. Justin's skull was cracked in half. They beat him real bad. And I knew in my heart when I watched the BCA and I watched the forensic pathologist and I watched the county attorney and I watched them all work together to cover up Justin's murder, I knew that there would be more murders. And I knew that there had been murders before him because it was too strategic how they all worked together to cover up the murder. So when we talk about that these are state-sanctioned murders that are happening and they are all working together. They have a system. It's not just the police. They are all working together and they have done this to our loved ones. They have taunted our families. People have come up dead for doing investigations, for trying to find out the truth of what happened to our loved ones. Attorneys have came up missing, have came up dead. Other family members have come up dead, and they're all, again, working together. And especially the BCA, and Drew Evans is the main person that have edited the videos, and they have worked strategically to do this to our families. We have one last family member that will speak, and then we will move forward with the rest of the speakers that are here that are standing in solidarity with our families. We will have come forward the mother of Philando Castile, Valerie Castile. Thank you.
Let me just explain stuff. Hey. Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God. Good morning, everyone. Sorry about that. It's been a rough 6 years, 5 years. 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. It's hard for us. I was at home and you know, I was just so depressed. and I wasn't going to come, and God said, and the spirit of my son said, get up, jump in that shower and make it over there, because you have to be there to stand in unity and solidarity with the rest of the families. So I'm here today because we just really want this jury to use their independent thinking and stop thinking the way that everyone else thinks. They need to think independently and look at the laws. These laws made by man, they are flawed. Yes. They are flawed. There are some good laws and there are bad laws. If they don't stand with the greater good of the people and they don't align with God's laws, then these laws are not good laws. So we have to constantly look to our state representatives and our senators to make better laws that will protect everyone equally. Some of these laws, they work for certain people and then they don't work for everybody. So they need to figure out what laws aligns with God's laws, because this is the problem. We're going by laws that were made in the 18th century. This is the 21st century, and I promise you, our founding fathers were not idiots. They left those laws open for interpretation as time goes by. But here we are, we're still living in these ancient laws, and I don't know what it is, or they don't want to change it. Just like right now, there was an amendment to the deadly force, but you ain't going to hear about that one. You're not going to hear about them, and no one has come forward to explain to us exactly what that means. And then it's at the Supreme Court. They thought about it. Our neighboring states said that they would not come in and help Minnesota because of the change of that law, that deadly force law. In essence, it's saying you can't shoot nobody in the back no more. You have to be in imminent danger. But they're not saying that. They're not telling us that that law was amended March 1st, supposed to went in effect, but it didn't go in effect other than it went to the Supreme Court to fight it, to put it back like it was. So it's up to us to stand in unity and solidarity and let these people know we're here in force. We're here in force as a group of mothers and family members that didn't need to be in what I consider this fucked up mothers club. I didn't ask to be here. You dropped this mess at my doorstep, so this is what you get. This powerful woman here with all these powerful women. So we're here and we're praying and hoping that the jurors really look at what happened, because it's amazing how you can believe a dressed up lie than the naked truth. You know what you saw. Exactly. You know what you saw, but yet you'll change your mind and go with the status quo because everybody else say they're not guilty when they literally are. You saw it with your own lying eyes. Yes. You saw it. You felt it. You were a part of that. I have nothing against law enforcement, but what I do have against them is when you support a murder, we got a problem. Yes. We got a problem. If you support murder, yes, I do have a problem with you. Me too. But I am glad to be here and stand in my family's presence, because I actually was not going to make it here, but God lit a fire in my ass, and here I am.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I needed that laugh. All right, so we will move forward with some of the people who have come strong. We have Representative John Thompson. We have John McCollum, President of Minnesota Justice Coalition. Trayhorn Cruz with Black Lives Matter Minnesota, and Simon, who is counsel for Bloomington, I believe. Richfield, sorry. So we will first call forward the president of Minnesota Justice Coalition, and that will be Justin McCollum. Thank you. Jonathan McCollum, sorry. Sorry, my brain is kind
You fine. Yeah, that's fine. Hello, my name is Jonathan McClellan, president of the Minnesota Justice Coalition. We are part of a collective of organizations that work with families and community to draft and advance legislation and other policy initiatives at the Capitol here in St. Paul and in Washington, D.C. I want to take this moment to uplift the family of Dante Wright and recognize their pain. On April 11, 2021, a sworn 27-year veteran police officer by the name of Kim Potter shot and killed Dante Wright, a black son, brother, father, and friend. As of this current date, the defendant has yet to apologize for her mistake. The people came to the streets to exercise their First Amendment right to seek redress from their government. Many young people in a state of fear wondered, would they be next? While local state elected officials tried to make it a Brooklyn Center issue, the shot from Kim Potter's gun was felt by millions around the world, and we responded. These young people and parents from all walks of life were met with rubber bullets, tear gas, flashbangs, and hunted in the streets like cattle by law enforcement. The community suffered from displacement, damage to their property, and damage to their health, regardless of whether they stayed inside their home or not. The press were beaten, maced, tear gassed, shot with rubber bullets, had equipment damaged, and detained for doing their job, one that, mind you, is constitutionally protected. The law enforcement did not protect and serve, they attacked. The outcry of this event led to the firing of a police chief, city manager, and caused one of the most aggressive resolutions from a city in our union, led by the Brooklyn Center mayor, and a call for a patterns and practices investigation by the Department of Justice in an open city council meeting. It led to the state attorney general taking over the case and to where we are today. While law enforcement in Brooklyn Center publicly grieved the loss of Kim Potter from the profession, the family was grieving the loss of a child whose life was snuffed out by a veteran police officer. To add insult to injury, the defendant, Kim Potter, has never apologized to the family of Dante Wright for her actions that killed their loved one. The defendant, Kim Potter, still enjoys a pension with raises every year courtesy of the taxpayer of the great state of Minnesota. She was allowed to go home every day. She was allowed to have Thanksgiving dinner with her family and share in the pleasantries of life. Dante's family had an empty seat at the table. They weren't allowed to share in the pleasantries of life, the joy of being together during the holiday, playing games with family and friends, hugging and kissing each other, or holding your newborn child, because of the actions of defendant Kim Potter, who killed him with a bullet from her gun that she carried for 27 years. The Minnesota Justice Coalition stands with the family of Dante Wright. We stand with the community. We stand with all those who came out demanding accountability and justice, because an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. And we cannot be silent. So while the wheels of justice turn in this case, let us uplift the family of Dante Wright and let us continue to demand justice. Thank you.
We will now call forward the president of Black Lives Matter Minnesota, Trayvon Cruz.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. BLM Minnesota stands in full solidarity with the family of Dante Wright and demands that Kim Porter be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We believe that what happened to Dante Wright was murder. The founder of Brooklyn Center was a Klansman, and a lot of the early founders here in Minnesota were connected to slavery, and because of that, Minnesota owes a debt to its black residents, and part of that debt is to stop killing us, or what we call cessation, which means stop harming us or stop killing us socially, politically, and economically. These bills have been passed, like the Hardell-Sherrill Act, of the historic bill that has been passed in Brooklyn Center and the St. Paul Recovery Act, but those, we want justice, but our bills need to be funded correctly. And there's money from the federal government that has came to Minnesota to do that, like ARP funds. Kim Porter has been on the police force longer than Dante Wright has been alive. Imagine how many times Kim Porter has pulled out her gun over the years, how many times she's been in target practice, how many times she's used her taser, and for her to pretend like she doesn't know the difference between a taser and a gun is a slap in the face to our community. Earlier, when protesters were doing a Lake Street Bridge shutdown, Jim Roth, the officer said, "Run them over, and I'll show you how to get away with it." Yes. So when we talk about the art of the cover-up, it's a cover-up. They'll say things like, "Oh, I thought the brake was the gas," or "I thought the gas was the brake," or "I thought my gun was a taser." These are lies that are taught to law enforcement over years. In the past, they were able to get away with it, but not nowadays, because the community is standing up and we're in solidarity with these families who have lost stolen lives. So we just want to see accountability for Kim Potter, and we want our children to stop being killed by law enforcement. Yes, yes. Whether it's Adam Toledo, Micaiah Bryant, Dante Wright. These are kids, and then kids are impacted by that. The child who, Darnella Frazier, was impacted by what happened to George Floyd. And there were also children there watching what happened to George Floyd. Yes. Dante's Wright children will be impacted by it. His brother is impacted by it. Hardell-Sherrill's children are impacted by this. Matilda Smith's family is impacted. Their children are impacted by police terror in America. So we want it to stop immediately, and we want to see Kim Potter. We expect nothing less than justice for Dante Wright over these next 30 days? Thank you.
We will now have Ms. Delshia Perry just say the few names of the people that died in the prisons, and then we will have a few more speakers and we will close out the press conference.
Thank you, Tashira. I got so emotionally upset with what's been going on with all of our families that one of the reasons why I started Be Their Voices was because there were other families. Naja Khan Powell, who you may not know his story, but he died in the Hennepin County Jail. Did no wrong. He was sick and ended up being taken out of the hospital and brought into the custody of Hennepin County, where he died. He hung himself. And then you have Stephanie Bunker, Tony May Jr., Bruce Lundmark, who was another individual who they swiftly took out of Beltrami County Jail, where my son died 3 years ago, and took him to Clearwater, where they said they were overcrowded. The man died in booking. They didn't even get to finish booking him in. And that's why I fight. That's why I do what I do. And I thank God for Tashira, for the work that she's doing. And I saw that everybody was talking about police accountability, but I said, you know what, it's further than that. We need accountability throughout all forms of law enforcement. Everyone needs to be held accountable. And how many more mothers have to bury their children? Enough is enough.
Thank you, Ms. Delshia. We will now call forward Representative John Thompson, who have stood in solidarity with all of our families and have gone through tremendous, horrendous harassment and everything else for standing with the community and what he believes and standing up for the lives of black men and all stolen lives. We will now call for Representative John Thompson. Thank you.
Good afternoon, State Representative John Thompson, JOHN-THOMPSON. I'm standing here again in solidarity with another family, Katie Wright's family at this time. And as Courtney Ross mentioned, we were all celebrating the birthday of Tashia's husband, when someone walked right in the crowd as I had the microphone and said, they've killed another man in Brooklyn Center. But before they said that, I said, I'm not psychic. Another person will be killed this year by law enforcement. Let's be clear. Professionals are held to a higher standard. Teachers are held to a higher standard. Educators, definitely. Administrators are held to a higher standard. Lawyers are held to a higher standard. Doctors, airline pilots. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Legislators. I know firsthand legislators are held to a higher standard. When are we going to hold law enforcement to that high standard that we claim should be, or do we just end the bar with me? Lawmakers are held to a higher standard. That should include law enforcement. It's not enough.